We're going to start with the big five. 5 questions that I'm going to ask you that you're going to think about the answers to that are going to inform your decision. You're going to use them to ask questions of the therapist and figure out who's right for you. And they're sort of like the first 5 lanterns lighting that path to finding the right person. Okay, question number 1. It's going to seem like an easy one, but in truth it trips up most people and they end up heading down the wrong path, and it's a bear trap for them. Often they quit therapy. Do you want a therapist who's active, or do you want a therapist who's passive? Well, of course, most people are going to say, I want a therapist who's active. Generations of therapists have been trained in the model of Sigmund Freud, who was the granddaddy of them all, who practiced 100 years ago in Vienna. Another time, another place. And Sigmund Freud believed that a therapist had to remain impassive, disengaged, really be a sort of blank screen for the client to project all their stuff onto. So many people come to me for therapy who have been to see people who practice this way, and they say, I didn't know anything about them, and I didn't really know what they believed, and it was sort of fun, useful, because I got to talk a lot about myself, but ultimately I didn't get anything. I didn't get anywhere. And then there are the other therapists who feel that it is a therapist's responsibility to sort of act like a regular person. And that means to be engaged, to talk to you, to answer questions, to maybe tell you about themselves if it's appropriate, and to really be another person in the room with you, heart and soul. Question number 2 is, do you want to head down into the caves of your past, or up into the daylight of the present and the future? Many therapists still believe, as Sigmund Freud, that you have to go into the trauma, the dark, musty, fusty caves of your past in order to change your present. They might call themselves psychoanalytic or psychodynamic. Those are the buzzwords. Other people, the other camp, believe that, they'll tell you there's no evidence actually that going into the past is a necessary part of change. They're right. And that the work needs to be concentrated on what's happening now, because that's where change happens. And they might call themselves cognitive behavioral or humanistic or positive psychologists or existential or gestalt. Now, many people mix the two. They'll typically call themselves eclectic. But you're going to want to ask your therapist, your potential therapist, before you start, how important do you feel it is that we spend a considerable amount of time exploring our past, if that's not where you want to go, or if it is where you want to go? What's the most important reason I'm going into therapy? What do I want to get out of it? You want to find somebody who really knows how to help with what you're looking for. You may be looking for something specific, like to work on relationships or anxiety, or you may be working on something more general, like I want to find more meaning in my life. But you want to ask the therapist about that. Do they know about it? Have they worked with a lot of other people on it? What do they find helps? Because all therapists aren't created equal. They go to graduate school, they get extra training, but they don't all know as much about all things. Number 4, this has to do with the letters after a person's name. And what that has to do with is how important is the level of training, the amount of training to you. So there are basically 4 different kinds of professionals who work in the field. There are psychiatrists, there are MDs. Mostly these days what they do is work on medication, so they won't be doing therapy, and they're probably not going to be people you're talking to. unless they're really unusual about doing therapy. Then there are psychologists. They've had from 6 to 8 years of training after undergraduate school, and they're the most highly trained. Then there are social workers. They've had 3 years. And then there are marriage and family therapists. They've usually had 2 years. Now, there's no evidence that more training makes somebody into a better therapist for you. However, if it were me, I'd want somebody with the most training I could afford who was also a great therapist. The last one is the simplest, but it has all kinds of reverberations. Do you want a man or a woman as your therapist? Do you care? Are you going to feel more comfortable speaking to somebody of your gender? Or do you feel it might be really helpful to talk to somebody who's the opposite? So let's say you were a woman and wanted to work on relationship issues with men. Maybe it would be helpful to find a good, kind man to work with. That kind of thing. So think about it. And you could also audition a man and woman and see how you felt about them. But we're going to get into that next.